The late 90s and early 2000s were a really weird era, full of unique video game concepts for Dragon Ball, and for as much as I appreciate variety, I don't think this is an era that many celebrate. It's not that these are the worst Dragon Ball games ever, it's that each one of them is very weird in their own way. I'm on a mission to finish and rank every Dragon Ball game ever made, and today we're gonna rank 3 very unique games. Welcome to episode 5 of the ranking of Dragon Ball games. Let's open the weird episode with the weirdest Dragon Ball game I've ever looked at. Dragon Ball Z Taiketsu. What the hell? The Legacy of Goku developers made this at the same time as Legacy of Goku 2, you know, the good one. They made the masterpiece and this. It certainly is a fighting game. And you can tell they went for that Mortal Kombat look. Can't say they nailed it though. It's a 4-button fighting game where you actually have motion inputs for supers. All of that on the Game Boy Advance, which turns out it's not the best platform when it comes to fighting games. It just drops inputs all the time, feels very inconsistent, but credit where it's due. These are some of the funniest supers I've ever seen. They're all unblockable, by the way, and even if you try dodging them, the game is like, nah, it's a super, you must die. You may have also noticed the testicle stage that we're in. Though to be fair, the stage art is actually one of the best parts of this game. Some stages do look really good for Game Boy Advance. You start with a very basic roster and play against the CPU in different game modes that are all basically just versus battles. And yes, that is how you unlock everyone, so you can take them into multiplayer, because this game has multiplayer. Remember, Game Boy Advance. So I had to invite a bunch of friends, content creators, and pro fighting game players to try it out in a tournament for money. The meta of the tournament quickly devolved into key charging into supers if the super inputs didn't randomly drop, or just throw loops over and over, because there is no way to tech throws and they deal very good damage. I also found it quite funny that if you look at the portraits during the character select screen, you have the final forms of each character, but then you pick them and they're all in their base form. But then when you win, the winning quote shows them in their final form again. Does the poor baby have a boo-boo? Yes, that's a real win quote from Frieza. It makes me think they were actually gonna have a transformation system, but then scrapped it and didn't change any of the assets in the game. And every character is mostly a clone of each other, just skins with different supers. What makes a character unique doesn't always feel intentional. For instance, if you knock down Cell, his tail will push you back, so it's not as easy to throw him again on Wake Up. So yeah, it's just usually silly stuff like that. In the end, it's one of those that it's so bad it becomes funny and you might have a good time discovering it, but it might be better as a viewer experience because playing it is really painful. I think it's by far the worst game we've played so far, so it's our first F-rank game. And for this episode, we're gonna mark the games with base Frieza, because the games are weird and having base Frieza playable without having final form Frieza playable is a very weird choice too. Next up, a game that I judged very harshly as a kid based on how it looked. This was at the time that Final Bout was coming out on PlayStation, and it looked all 3D and cool. And on the Sega Saturn, although technically 3D, this game was still using sprites. Dragon Ball Z The Legend, released in only 4 countries worldwide, mine included, so I can perhaps offer a unique perspective of what it was like to live during a time that Sega was promoting this and Sony was promoting Final Bout. It wasn't even close. It's pixel graphics versus polygons. It's Super Saiyan 3 versus Super Saiyan 4. Final Bout was considered by far the better game by every metric, but this game came out first, about a year before Final Bout did, and so for a very short period of time, this was probably considered the best Dragon Ball game on the market. And it's probably the weirdest one we have today. It's a fighting game, but you don't damage your opponent's health bar when you attack them. Instead, you're trying to win the struggle bar at the bottom, which once it's full, gives you a super attack cutscene. And this super is the only way to deal damage to the opponent, and you gotta repeat this process over and over again until you finish the fight. This sounds boring as hell, and well, it is, but I kinda respect it now. Up to this point, the fighting games we had were the Butoden games, which were becoming solid 2D fighting games, but Dragon Ball was so much more than that. Butoden was too grounded, too stiff for what Dragon Ball was, and with this game, suddenly, attacks are faster than the eye can see. You're flying across a gigantic stage incredibly fast. This feels more like Dragon Ball than any game has ever before. Plus, it may still be sprite work, but it's now 3D, and I think the work they did with the camera and faking 3D sprites was so impressive that nowadays I just appreciate this game a lot more. I was, however, split playing this game recently because while I was really impressed with the concept and how they achieved this 3D effect, at the same time, I don't think the game plays very well. And so I started story mode, which covers the entirety of Dragon Ball Z, and at the end of each mission, I was getting a rating, which goes from 1 to 100. And I wasn't sure what was influencing the rating at first, and then I realized it was wasn't doing well in combat. It wasn't getting it perfect on the opponent. No. It was how accurate you are to the real Dragon Ball story. During these fights, you have full control of who you play as, who sits on the bench, who you bring out to fight, and I first noticed the game adjusting when it didn't give me Super Saiyan Goku in the fight against Frieza. Goku only turned Super Saiyan when I let Krillin die on purpose. And that's incredible. There's so much that this game does or reacts depending on who you bring to the fight. For instance, if you take out Goku in this fight, why would Android 16 be in it anymore? Goku is all he cares about. So you take out Goku and Android 16 just leaves. And I thought the game reacting to the characters you bring onto the stage or by letting someone else be defeated on purpose, because that's what happens in the story, was a nice attention to detail that games don't really go into anymore. Now, granted, sometimes waiting for someone to die is boring. It just involves a lot of waiting. And that's where this concept kind of falls apart. It's not fun gameplay to just wait for the AI to do its thing. But I went into it expecting garbage and came away from it thinking that I actually like this better than Final Bout. Globku as a kid was not very smart. I'm ranking this above Dragon Ball GT Transformation. I respect it a lot, but let's not forget, it still doesn't play great, so that's as high as it climbs. But enough fighting games, let's talk about diversifying. What else can we do with the Dragon Ball license? How about an RPG with some brawling, some flying exploration? That's exactly what they try to do with Dragon Ball Z Sagas. Oh boy. It's important to locate you in time for this one, because if you look at this game without any context, you might think this game is ancient. This came out at the same time as Budokai Tenkaichi. This is the game that followed Budokai 3. It's a 3D beat-em-up that, much like DBZ The Legend, wanted to give players some freedom, wanted to break that fighting game formula that people were used to with the Budokai series, and allow players to fly around and fight in a 3D space. And while Avalanche Software, yes, the same Avalanche that would later do Hogwarts Legacy, while they succeeded in giving you that 3D freedom with this game, it completely lost any Dragon Ball identity to me. Basically, you make it through a pretty linear level, each one with collectibles that can increase your health and ki, or give you new abilities if you buy them from the shop, and then you fight a boss at the end. The structure itself would be fine, but the movement isn't really what you expect out of a Dragon Ball game. You can fly, but you can't go up or down, which means there are some light platforming sections, where you're kind of climbing platforms to get the height that you need to start flying and go collect some coins, but more often than not, you will be running on the ground, and this running looks pretty goofy. And then combat, even though the game gives you a decent amount of combos, they don't look or feel very different. They don't have very unique properties either, so you're not really encouraged to use them that much. You have no camera controls, which makes the exploration extremely frustrating, but as you might have noticed, the game does have local co-op. You can play through the whole thing with a friend. There are aspects of this game that are actually worse in co-op. For instance, the camera is now shared between the two of you. Every time you throw a super, time slows down to a halt so you can aim it, which means your co-op partner can just keep stopping time to annoy you. And some fights in this game are still 1v1s even though you're on co-op, and the way the game handles that is by having you and your partner take turns on a timer with the most annoying alarm you've ever heard in a video game. And then some small details kind of bother me as a Dragon Ball fan. For instance, why is Vegeta's Gallic Gun red? Why is Vegeta wearing the Cell Saga outfit in Namek? They have the shoulder pads outfit during the boss fight, why not use that model instead? Why does his portrait keep the shoulder pads even though we've made it to the Cell Saga? He's a Super Saiyan now and we're still on that design. You see the cracks here and there, and it's this kind of attention to detail that made me appreciate Dragon Ball Z The Legend, and it's just completely lacking here. But it wasn't all negative, so here are some cool things that Saga does. First of all, anime cutscenes. They used the original anime in between missions, and I think back in the day when CG cutscenes weren't as good, that was something that I did appreciate. Even though the mission gameplay is very similar, they do try to give it some variety. For instance, in the Hyperbolic Time Chamber, you're practicing combos. In Namek, you have to survive Frieza for a set amount of time instead of defeating him. Against Semi-Perfect Cell, he just keeps running away mid-fight. These end up not playing very differently, but it's an attempt at variety at least. And I was a big fan of randomly fighting a boss and triggering a big knockback, watching them crash into a mountain in the background. That always caught me off guard, but always felt really, really cool. You can also charge a Kamehameha and then hit the teleport button once you unlock that ability and kind of do a manual warp Kamehameha. And how many Dragon Ball games do you know that let you play in Yard Rat? Come on, that's pretty cool. Is that enough stuff to distract you from the boring combat, poor movement, and overall lack of depth this game has? Probably not. This is the kind of game that I would often find myself excusing because, well, they were figuring out stuff. It's a new console. concept, and back in the day, it wasn't so easy. But then I remember that this came out after Budokai 3, and it becomes pretty hard to defend. I think it's about as bad as the first Legacy of Goku, so that's where I'll rank it. And you may have noticed that this episode felt a bit more scattered. The games didn't really belong together for as much as I tried to connect them. So instead of forcing that in the future, maybe some episodes will only have one game, or maybe two. Basically, I'm saying going forward, there's no rules, and hopefully that helps me deliver these episodes a little bit faster. If you've missed the previous episode though, I've ranked all the Dragon Ball GT games, all 2 of them. Check out the video right here, and thank you so much for watching. Bye.